Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium Podcast, and it's a panel discussion. I'm so excited. I've done so many interviews in the last, 6 to 12 months, where it's just me and an author or me and somebody else, and we've had a dearth of panel discussions. Well, we're going to try to remedy that a little more long-term, but let's start with today, talking about A Wrinkle in Time. This is actually... what's the thing called? The fundraising service that we used?
Patreon?
No, the other one where we did the whatever. This is the second book that was voted on by those who helped us out financially. So we're going to be discussing Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, which I'm really excited about. Talk about a classic. We've done a lot of classics on this podcast, but this is top tier, top shelf, classic. So I am Craig, and with me today, you already heard her lovely voice. That's Megan. How you doing, Megan?
I'm happy. How are you, Craig?
I'm all right. Like I said, I'm excited to talk about this one. And you haven't heard his lovely voice yet, but you will. You know him as Codingfoo, and today you will continue to know him as Codingfoo. How's it going, buddy?
It's going good. Happy to be here.
So we are, just like we did with the Redwall series, I threw the call out to some of our patrons. Hey, if you'd like to appear on these episodes, let me know and we can make that happen. And so you picked Wrinkle in Time that you wanted to join us for, and I really appreciate that. I'm excited to talk Madeleine L'Engle with you. Okay.
Yep.
Before we get into it, I'll remind everybody to go to thelegendarium.com. Thelegendarium.com, where you can get past episodes, you can get the calendar with future episodes, you can also get links to Patreon and Discord, and if you're listening to this before February of 2024, you can get the link to our meetup happening in Ogden, Utah, just outside Salt Lake City. So if you are able to and willing to, you want to come out and join us for a weekend of, I'm sure, just insanity and debauchery, then you should do so. The link for that there is at thelegendarium.com. Okay, guys, let's talk A Wrinkle in Time. Where do I even start with this? This book was published in 1962, won all the awards. Everybody recognized it, it seemed to recognize it immediately for the classic that it was destined to be. That doesn't mean that everybody loves it, and we can talk about some of the reactions to the book. But first, let's give ours. Codingfoo, what did you think of your read? Was this your first time? Was it a reread? And how did it go for you?
No, it's kind of why I wanted to talk about this. Is it was one of those formative books I read as a kid, but I hadn't read it since, and so. I mean, I was probably 12, I think, when I first read it, and somewhere around there. And so I didn't remember too much. I definitely remembered like the Tesser and just kind of a little bit of the general details, but the
Mrs. W's and some of those things that stick out to a kid.
Yep. And then I had seen the movie, the most recent movie, and then this read through was a whole different, I definitely understand a lot more. I'm matured as a reader. And so reading it this time was very enjoyable to reread kind of that classic, and it held up. Like I every once in a while you reread a certain thing you read as a kid and didn't enjoy it. Yeah. But
I have been told that under no circumstances should I go back and read Hatchet. This was... Megan, was this a thing for you? I'm pretty sure all boys who were born in between the 70s and the 90s had to read Hatchet when they were in, say, 5th, 6th grade, something like that. And I've been told not to go back and read it. I'm sure it's not that bad, but
they're still doing it. They're still reading it. My daughter just read Hatchet. So,
but A Wrinkle in Time, definitely holds up. It's a bit like. It's a bit like a weightier Redwall. I mean, we just got done doing a few Redwall books where, hey, this is perfect for kids. It talks to them on their level, stuff they can understand. But like I said, it's weightier, it's meatier with philosophy and emotion, I think, than the Redwall books, which are kind of, you just kind of like skip across the surface of the lake, and here you dive in a little bit more, at least in my view. Megan, what did you think? How did it go?
I really like the timelessness aspect of this one, where it really, I mean, it was written in the 60s, but it feels like it could have been written at any time. Because it's kind of made up. Well, it's based probably on actual science, but it's it gets to be its own thing. And I really enjoyed this book. It's the second time I read it. I read it for the first time a couple of years ago as an adult, and I forget exactly why, but I remember I liked it so much that I immediately bought the 5-book box set and sent it to my nephew. Still haven't read the other 4 books, so I don't know if he read them. I don't know if he's read all of them or just one of them, but it was one that meant a lot to me. Just, I don't know if everybody feels like a weirdo sometimes, but I definitely do. And so it was kind of cool that Meg's differentness was part of her superpower. And one of the gifts that she was given is, remember how you're different, remember your problems, because they'll be a strength.
And that was true for Charles Wallace as well. Everybody is kind of made to embrace themselves, to embrace their superpower, right?
Exactly.
Oh shoot, what was I going to say? You know what? Before we go on with the book, Codingfoo, you referenced the latest movie. Oh no, I remember what I was going to say. Actually, it kind of ties in as well. I did not see the latest one, not because I am like a constant or continuing devotee of this book. I like you, I haven't read it since I was a teenager, but when the movie came out, I was like, there's no world in which this movie enhances my enjoyment of the story. So it wasn't like it. I don't even know what people generally think about it. Maybe people loved it, maybe people hated it. I didn't pay attention. I just said, you know what? It's fine. I don't want to. I don't want the movie to kind of crowd the space in my head and my heart for this story. And similarly, Megan, you were talking about like, I haven't read the other 4 books. Are there 4 more Wrinkle in Time books?
There are at least 4. She doesn't. They're not sequels. They're more just kind of like more stories
companion
about
books.
these
companion
characters.
books. Okay,
yes, companion books.
Yeah, I feel like I've been burned too many times by continuations of really classic books. This, I don't know how classic it'll be in 50, 60, 75 years, but a good example for me would be the Hunger Games, where I really enjoyed the first book, thought it was excellent, and then by the time I was done with the 3rd book, it had ruined the first book for me.
Oh no.
It's like, oh no, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So that's, like I said, kind of a stupid example, but when I find something like A Wrinkle in Time, where I'm like, book 1 is amazing and it can't possibly, my experience with it can't be improved by continuing on with the series, then I don't, which is, I know that is unfair. It is, I admit it. I throw it out there. That is unfair. And people can throw their comments in for, what should be the exceptions to that. Or if I'm just outright wrong, that's fine too. But
well, and it could also fall under the handle of, well, that's not how I imagined the characters would end up, because it definitely goes into like children of main characters and what happens to the main characters. And there are a lot of people that don't like what happens with Meg. It's like, oh, well, okay.
Tangent
you don't want
time,
that to be ruined. That's fine.
Tangent time. Similar to what I was just talking about. The one of maybe a top 3 season of television of all time is the first season of Ted Lasso. And by the time I finished the series, I will give no spoilers about what happens to who or whatever, but by the time I got done with the series, I was so just, I don't know if furious is the right word, but just utterly exasperated with the choices that they had made for their characters. And kind of similar to what I was talking about just a moment ago, it doesn't ruin, but it casts a pall over
a few of the storylines
genius
are wrapped
of
up
the
a
first
little bit
season.
too quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some of that. Anyway, but I bring that up partly to beat the dead horse of the point that I was bringing up earlier, and also because if you've watched Ted Lasso, you remember that A Wrinkle of Time is the book that Ted gives to Roy Kent in the first season, when he's giving everybody books that it's like obviously personally chosen for them to teach them some lesson. He gives them A Wrinkle in Time. So what do we get out of A Wrinkle in Time? What are the moments, the characters, the decisions, anything you want? What are the highlights? What are the things that we pull out of this book? And I'll start with mine.
Okay.
Just to give you guys a little time to think about it for a second. This is a point that I brought up with Redwall, and it is a point that I will bring up with any really well done children's book, probably any really well done children's book, and that is the idea of certain cliches. We get this in Harry Potter. We get this in a million kids' books, but love conquering all. Love is the antidote. Love is the thing that overcomes evil in the end. And it's this, in the hands of a poor author, or if delivered to the wrong audience in the wrong way, it can be just, an eye-rolling cliche. Oh, sure, okay, the power of love, blah, blah, blah. But by the time you get to the end of this book, it's a very short book. So you get to the end of this story, but you feel like, you have gone through so much with these characters. Yeah. And so I feel like it's earned, and it's earned in the story on its own right, and it's also delivered perfectly for its audience, which is, preteens and young teenagers, right?
Yeah.
So for those who don't remember, we didn't even do a recap of the story, but the evil presence, the darkness that kind of covers much of the universe, whatever, and it's partially taking over Earth or whatever. They go to a planet that's totally covered by it, and it has hypnotized her little brother, Charles Wallace, and she has to go rescue him. And how can she break him out of the spell of it? And she does it through love, telling him that she loves him over and over again, and it snaps him out of it, and they break the spell. And so, like I say, if you describe it in that way, that's a horrible cliche, isn't it? But when you read it in this book, written the way that she wrote it, I don't mind it at all. I really like that moment.
It's also one of those books that's so old that like it kind of maybe set. There's probably stuff prior to it, but it's old enough that it set it.
Yeah, it came out before Harry Potter, so Harry Potter's the cliche
by a bit,
not A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah, which, I struggle with
Potter,
that.
It is my fandom, but still.
I struggle with that sort of thing because I feel like that's probably true, but I'm not well versed enough in the history of science fiction and children's stories to know for sure. And so
I've been listening to the audiobook. I borrowed it on the Libby app, and at the end of it, there was a afterword written by one of Madeleine L'Engle's granddaughters. Where
I did the same thing. I listened to it this time.
It's fascinating. It was so good. And it just put a totally different spin where it talks about how like the planet became dark because it was obsessed with decorum, and everybody searches out like safety and security and not having to think too much and just sort of being able to be part of the status quo. And let's see, what she said is, that her grandmother said, she said, love is not power, which is always considered coercive. Love is to be vulnerable, and is only in vulnerability and risk, not safety and security, that we overcome the darkness. Which I found really fascinating, especially when you think about how when the kids are having the conversation with the missuses, early on, they talk about how it's the artists and the thinkers and the scientists who are the ones that are like waging the war against the darkness, because these are people who are being vulnerable and reaching outside of themselves and thinking like odd thoughts and being subversive in that way where they're not relying on the status quo. They're not doing the safe thing. And I often tell my friends when they tell me something that's really hard for them, I always thank them for their vulnerability and trusting me with that vulnerability, because that's a big deal. And that takes a lot for people to be able to do that. So I just imagine Meg going to Charles Wallace and saying, I love you, and having that vulnerability and realizing that she might get sucked in with him because she's there with him. And she's no stronger than he is, but she does it because she cares about him, because she knows that vulnerability. He is going to appreciate that because he loves her too.
Yeah.
And that's something that the bad guy doesn't have. I picked up on that same quote. Like, I listened to it as well. The audiobook performance was great. And that afterward was, it was one of the best parts of kind of that story.
I love an accompanying text with something like this where, you know, somebody breaks it down. And sometimes it's for, I just did the episode about the, not just the Inferno, the comedy, Dante's comedy. And like, that's a text where I appreciate the accompanying text to just explain what the heck is going on. But with a story like this, it's not that I take her granddaughter's, and I haven't read this passage that you guys are talking about. It's not that I would take her view as the gospel truth, but it is nice to have an interpretation from somebody who is a lot closer to the text and the author than I am, right? So it's nice to get their view on it, get a view to consider and accept or reject as you will.
On that love part, there was something that maybe different than other things is like, she didn't beat like she didn't somehow free the entire planet. She just freed Charles Wallace. It mentions like, I wasn't able to love it and like, you know, somehow defeat it. But she was able to love Charles Wallace and free him. But it wasn't like this grand, like, you know, she went on a quest and beat all the bad or anything like that. It was just her and her brother.
I thought that was interesting because I thought I had the same thought when it got to the end of the book and it just kind of ended. It's like, oh, they're home and the dad is home and that's great. And I thought, well, what was the whole point behind this book? And really the whole point and what the missuses were trying to do, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep calling them that because I love it. They were trying to help bring Mr. Murray home. Like they were trying to help Charles Wallace and Meg bring him home. And that was pretty much all they did. Like that was the only change. But in bringing him home, they have somebody else that will help the world to fight the darkness that they're all in, because now they are also aware of the darkness and they also know how to beat it.
Yep. It was kind of help train more people to help fight against the darkness.
Well, and also embrace who they are, which especially kids at that age, like young kids, want to be the same. Nobody wants to be the weird kid. Nobody wants to, you know, they like everybody goes to junior high. I don't know if you guys were like this. I sure was. Nobody wants to be the weird one. I was like the last one, I swear, to shave my legs. And it was a big deal to all of my friends. Like, oh my gosh, Megan, did you do? I'm like, I totally did 3 days ago. I'm so glad you could tell. Because nobody wants to be the weird kid. So that's a really hard thing to embrace. And as we get older, we're like, oh, actually, this is part of what makes me cool, is that I'm a little bit wacky. And it's one of the reasons why my friends like to hang out with me, because we're not all exactly the same. And you bring something interesting into my life.
Yep. We should talk about conformity. Do I want to talk about it now? Actually, I want to stick with the ending.
Okay.
But yeah, remind me, let's come back to the idea of conformity in here, because that's a huge theme in this book, right? Individualism versus conformity. But again, considering the audience, what a stroke of genius to take a story that's so grand, it's so huge. You know, in Star Wars terms, the Empire has got their Death Star and they're leveling it at the galaxy and saying, you know, we'll kill you if you don't submit. And in most stories like that, you blow up the Death Star, you dismantle the Empire, you force massive sweeping change through your actions. And in this one, I hadn't thought about it until you guys were just talking about it, but what a stroke of genius to present this giant problem and then present a solution that isn't as grand as the problem, but it's accessible. It's mentally and emotionally accessible to a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
We talk about spheres of influence. And if you're 12, you're not, I mean,
you're not saving the galaxy. You're not
right,
saving
right. Joan of Arc's excluded, right?
Right. Ender Wiggin excluded.
I'm thinking more real world examples. It is unlikely that as a child you are going to make massive sweeping changes to the whole world. But we all have a sphere of influence. And if you're a teenage girl like Meg, your sphere of influence is especially strong with your little brother or, your immediate family or your closest friends, right? You have this really small circle as a kid like that. And so what a stroke of genius for her to present a solution that is contained within a realistic sphere of influence inside this obviously fantastical story.
Right.
Yeah, I really like that.
1000%. She doesn't necessarily change the world that she lives in, but she changes her personal world where like the thing that she's most made fun of is that her dad is gone and now her dad is back. So I guess there are going to be other things that kids may tease her about later, but that's one thing where she's like, yeah, my dad is home and I made that happen.
Yeah.
She was able to bring her whole family home.
I've got 2 kids in elementary school right now. And, one of them is about to go to junior high here in the next little while. And can confirm kids can be real dicks.
Yep. Yep.
Sometimes I'm tempted to be like, no, kids wouldn't say that to each other. They're not going to, nobody's going to make fun of you for your dad not being around. Oh, yes, they will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Kids can be really awful sometimes. Okay. Other favorite moments or bits that you guys want to talk about before I go to, conformism and the 60s and communism and all that stuff.
Another theme was kind of realizing the fallibility of adults.
Yeah, go.
Love it. That moment when they're back on, they've escaped from Camazotz, and she's realizing her dad. The feeling of like, oh, if I just find my dad, if I just get to him, then everything will be solved. And he was able to partially save them. Like he was able to get Calvin and Meg out, but not Charles Wallace. And so it's kind of showing, he was able to do some stuff, but, he wasn't the fix-all.
It wasn't a silver bullet. Yeah, just because you're an adult.
Yeah. Another example I was thinking of when you brought that up was her conversation with her teacher and then the principal afterwards toward the beginning where, Meg is being pig-headed and the teacher basically throws her out. And I'm just, there's that piece of me that's reading it from Meg's point of view, basically. That's like, well, if you took some time and you really talked to her, but she's an overworked teacher. She doesn't really have that time. It's hard when you have one kid that's really hard because you have a whole bunch of kids that you're supposed to teach. So it's just kind of easier to shuffle that kid into like the problem category and then send it to the principal who just really condescending. He's like, oh yeah, no, I'll totally listen. But then it's just kind of like, doesn't care about her point of view, doesn't listen. And so I can see her, like she feels good with her mom, but she doesn't really trust any other adult because nobody else will make time for her.
Yeah.
They say they want to help, but they don't really follow through. And so that's not helpful.
No, it's not.
The other thing I would bring up is like, or my other bit I thought was funny was, this flew over my head when I was a kid, but like Calvin, he's a smooth talker, right? Like he had some lines in there with Meg that I was like, you might be talking a little old for, I don't know.
Well, but even then, you see where Calvin's coming from. You have this very brief glimpse of his mother beating his 2 younger siblings.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's just another unreliable adult who isn't listening to the individual kids. She has too many kids to deal with and too much going on.
Yep.
To deal with this world problem.
All right. Should we talk philosophy here?
Yep.
Sure.
Especially, you know what? We're going to break the party rule, guys. You go to a party. What are the two things you're never supposed to discuss?
Politics
and religion. So let's talk politics and religion, shall we?
Yay!
Because
they're both in this book.
And in heavy doses. I looked up the date because it felt I would have, if you'd asked me before I read the book, when was it published, I would have said, I don't know, 50 years ago, something. While reading the book, if you asked me, this time around, if you'd asked me when was this written, I would have said sometime in like the early to mid 70s. But in fact, it was 1962, and I thought that was really interesting with the book's depiction of it. It has to be said. Its depiction of communism, basically like the forced conformism, or as somebody puts it on, I checked out the Wikipedia page and people have got quotes in there. Let's see, somebody compared Camazotz to an early 60s American image of life in a communist state. And so I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, where Madeleine L'Engle, hey, she's not from the Soviet Union or wherever, right? But in the 60s, we had this image of what communist countries would look like. And one of my enduring images from even when I was a kid is when they get to, is it on Camazotz or is it the other one with the uniform houses? They're walking down the road. Yeah, on Camazotz. And, and it's this kind of creepy image, and all the people are kind of drones that are all doing the same thing and walking the same way. And so it's this kind of dark version of like the Stepford Wives or something, right? I always think of that line from Gone in 60 Seconds where they're lost, and the character goes, "Oh man, I'm stuck in suburbia hell." And like that's what that moment kind of feels like. Anyway, and I'm not sure exactly how far to go with this, but I do think it's interesting to think about when this was written in the 60s. Okay, so it was the early 60s when, we passed through the age of McCarthyism, but communism was still a major fear of most Americans back in the 60s. They were terrified of the communist regimes. And this is the image that at least she had, and it obviously resonated with a ton of people, even at the time. So, obviously, life in communist countries was more complex than what she was, than what she was presenting. It's not like everybody's walking around brainwashed or something. But yeah, I like that kind of peek into the early 60s American mindset. So
that is interesting. I also thinking about the early 60s, I think of segregation.
Good one.
And kind of I'm a white woman, so I don't know that I feel like I can say a whole lot about segregation. Except like, it's just kind of another one of those things where, they're different. We should keep them at arm's length, but actually the differences are what help make all of us whole. Like we need each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
I'm so sorry. I just totally.
Well, they kind of bring that up in the afterword, but Meg says she talks about like not being equal.
Yes.
Or equal.
Yes.
What is that? Anyways, essentially like we can be equal but not alike, I think is actually the correct.
Right. Which is, I mean, that's an ongoing debate now in our generation as well. What do these words mean, and what should we be striving for?
Yeah. Kind of, we don't need to conform, but maybe share equal rights type of thing versus
equal or
Camazotz. Yeah. In Camazotz, the thing is everyone's doing the same thing to the same beat. They're literally in sync. to avoid any pain.
Which is right. I mean, that gets into the whole idea of security, safety, and
Yes.
security
Mhm.
versus freedom,
Yep.
being a big part of it, of that debate. Right?
With-
Megan, it looked like you realized something, or you were going to say something.
No, I found the quote that Codingfoo
yeah.
was referring to, and
Yeah, let's hear
he
it.
basically said the things. So
I still want to hear it.
well, now I've lost it.
Oh,
It says, no. So she's trying to think of the words of the Declaration of Independence, because it doesn't like rhyme or have a pattern. And she says that's exactly what we have on Camazotz. Complete equality, everybody exactly alike. For a moment, her brain reeled with confusion. Then came a moment of blazing truth. No, she cried triumphantly. Like and equal are not the same thing at all.
Yep.
Yeah, it calls to mind Brave New World, another dystopian novel. This one not for children, obviously.
Okay.
But Brave New World, it presents this society with kind of rigid structure and egalitarianism in the way that we're talking about, but it asks you a really uncomfortable question in Brave New World, which is this wrong, and if so, why? And it's when you read that book, that is a tough question to answer, right? Whereas when you read A Wrinkle in Time, Madeleine L'Engle gives you this image of Camazotz, and it is I couldn't have remembered any of the specific language that she used or anything like that, but similar to the other stuff I was mentioning, remembering from when I was a kid, I never forgot just how utterly creepy Camazotz is. With the kind of pulsing and everybody, as you say, doing things to the same rhythm, and all.
She takes something as basic as play, which is supposed to be when you are getting creative and you're figuring things out and you're learning for yourself. And it's nice to have rules when you're playing a game or something, but you have to be able to have fun with it. You have to be able to explore and to learn. And these poor kids, like there's the one kid that was bouncing off the beat, and he ended up having to go into some kind of weird therapy, and was actively in pain as he was bouncing the ball on the beat, because he wasn't able to be creative. He wasn't able to play with it, and he wasn't growing.
And it's tough to be that kid.
I thought it was interesting that the one time we see that pain that he was going through, when the promise of like Camazotz is freedom of pain and all of that. So it's like, oh, if you don't conform, then you get punished, and you feel that pain that they promise you won't have if you conform. So,
and it's we can bring in the Stormlight Archive here. I'll spoil a line, but if you haven't read the books, don't worry. There's no context. I'm not spoiling anything for you. But the line, if you've read those books, you'll remember, you cannot have my pain.
Yep.
And there's something of a similar lesson there, where what is it that you truly want? Do you truly want what you call freedom from pain, freedom from want, freedom from need? Is that what you really want? Or do you want creativity and growth, personal excellence, or whatever your goals may be? Do you want to have goals?
Yeah.
Is that a thing? Because that all comes with pain. Yeah. It's an unavoidable fact of our existence, and it's going to be of different kinds and different degrees, but it is unavoidable if we want, essentially, if we want growth and goals.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk religion. We can come back to politics if we want. Let's talk religion.
Okay.
Because this is a thoroughly Christian book, right? It is soaked through with tons of references and allusions and full-on quotes from like the Gospel of John and all that stuff. So this is a thoroughly Christian book. And yet, my understanding, imperfect though it is is that there are a lot of Christians there were and maybe are still a lot of Christians who do not care for this book because it casts a very wide, you might call it a liberal net. It casts a net liberally across time and human experience, and says, look, this may be a Christian book, and you talk about the light versus the darkness, and this represents Christ, and that's the sacrament, and this is the whatever imagery you want to pull in, but there are multiple references to non-Christian things and people throughout history and in their moment that are also fighting back against the darkness. And so, for a certain type of a very conservative Christian, that it may not sit as well. And I know that it didn't for some people. Did you guys pick up on any religious themes that you liked, didn't like? How did the religion in this book play for you?
I like that bit about that they added that she listed all those other like religious figures and some non-religious figures as like people
scientists and artists
as fighting back, because she could have, if she really wanted to, just said, oh, it was just Jesus Christ, or just
Aslan,
Arabic prophets, or not Abrahamic prophets, not Arabic, sorry. Like that whole Judeo-Christian list, if you will, versus she was kind of inclusive of multiple different faiths and non-faith. And so, I read that some of commentary about how some people didn't like that.
It's a viewpoint that I quite like. You can believe in the truth, and you can believe that the religion you belong to, or the way you were raised, like this is the truest way to live, by however you want to define the word truth, right? That's fine if you want to believe that. But where I get off the train is when somebody starts talking about a certain mode of thinking or a certain tradition as having a monopoly on truth, and nothing else has anything to offer. And so I like this, the way that she handles that stuff. And I know this is very surface level. We're not like diving into any of the specific instances or whatever, but I like that kind of wider net that she casts, to use my previous phrase.
I do too. It felt very inclusive, but it also just gives a validity to, it's okay to open your mind. It's okay to look at these things in a different way, because here these children are looking at that in a different way. Like these, are people, these were religious leaders, these were writers, but they are also warriors fighting a battle. And you are one of the warriors fighting this battle with yourself, with however that looks in your life. I admit that I was very uncomfortable when the name Jesus came up, because like you said, Craig, I have a very specific idea in my mind of Jesus and like how the world works. But I am not opposed to having that challenge. I'm not opposed to looking at it in a different way. And I would hope that the way that it's brought in, like mentioned in this book, is, I don't want to say a safe way, but it's like, it's a way that doesn't, I just lost my whole train of thought. I just hope that it's a way that kids would be able to kind of look at it and like just enough and be like, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at that. Maybe I could look at X, Y, Z in a little bit of different way too. Because I was reading that and I was thinking about a conversation I had with my nieces a couple of years ago, where one of my nieces was like, we were talking about church and some of the things we'd learned there. She's like, yeah, I just have a hard time believing that such and such. And I just, in my mind, I was like, you're 11. What do you know? Like, why do you think you know what that is? But I don't remember what I said. Something very useless, very neutral and very useless. But I also think it's kind of cool that she's trying to use her critical thinking and her critical reasoning. And yes, she has a very small experience, but that's one of the reasons why we read. That's when, like, we read things to learn things we wouldn't have otherwise. And so I would hope that that would kind of give a safe space to explore their thoughts. That's what I was trying to say before.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. All right, let's begin the process of wrapping it up. And what
I was going to ask if you said what you wanted to say about conformity, or if we missed that window.
You know what? Okay, I'll say this, because if we're going to do some final thoughts, I'll just make this kind of my final thought. I think that if you make her political observations abstract enough, I like them. If you talk about conformity versus individuality and freedom and all that stuff, like I'm all in. That's great. I do think if you read it too with too much of an allegorical eye, which maybe she was writing with, maybe she wasn't, but it does feel very much like what's the line? The full tilt boogie toward freedom, whatever. I can't remember the line from the movie, but she's a 60s American writing about communism. That's definitely what it feels like. And like I said, the question is a lot more complicated than what we get on what's the name of the planet? I keep Camelot. I can never remember it for whatever reason. I should.
It's like Camelot, but not.
That's right. Apparently it's a Mayan bat god. That's what Wikipedia taught me. That's the name of a Mayan bat god. That's cool. Anyway, the reality is so much more complicated. When you're talking about communism back in the 60s or whatever, I think her religious angle hits a lot better for me than her political one. Like I say, if you abstract it enough, then I'm with her. But if you make it allegorical, then it's like, you may not have known as much as I would have liked you to, or portrayed as much as I would have liked you to about the complexities of some of the political dynamics at play here. But hey, that's just me. Overall, I mean, okay, so if we're doing final thoughts, I will say, what a pleasure. I'm so glad I got to revisit this one. We're only giving this a really short treatment. We could do hours if we wanted to dig into really get into the text, but we're not doing that. We're just kind of skating over the surface here. And I really enjoyed the chance to go back to it. It's so short. It's so easy to read as an adult. You can knock this out in an afternoon, and less than that, it'll take you a couple hours and you're done. So if it's been a while since you've read A Wrinkle in Time, just go give it another shot. It's a really, really lovely kids book that holds up for adults and gives you plenty to think about.
Great.
Megan?
I would add on.
No, yeah, go ahead, Codingfoo.
Do the audiobook.
Oh, yeah? Do you know who read it?
Hope Davis.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and it was that good, huh?
I got to double check.
Really good.
Yeah.
She does a really good job with it.
Yeah, they did audio effects with different voice, like when it was talking versus kind of others, and just it made Camazotz feel even spookier for kind of what you were mentioning. So,
one thing if I'm talking about my last thoughts, I think about Meg at the beginning of the book, and I think about what she goes through and her life at the end. And in the first chapter, she says, I am full of bad feeling. This poor girl is really struggling. She feels very alone. She feels very beat up. And she meets Calvin. I mean, she has her brother and she has her mom who understand her and love her as she is. But Meg also knows that her mom and her brother are also othered. Which again makes her feel alone because she feels like she has to protect them against the world. And so again, she is very alone. And she meets Calvin, who is a pretty cool kid, who thinks that she's amazing and very cool and has wanted to get to know her for all of this time. And as she goes on these adventures, I think it's fascinating, her conversation with Aunt Beast, where Aunt Beast is trying to, what is vision? What is seeing? What is looking? And Meg is trying to explain it, but she doesn't know how to explain something that is so common and so normal to her. And I feel like there are a lot of adults who feel like this too, but people, even the people who care about you and will take the time to listen, don't always understand things from your point of view. But just having somebody who is willing to listen means everything. Just having somebody who cares enough to want to help, who will sit there and not understand, but love you through it, will help you get through the bad feelings, will help you get through the dark times, penetrating your world or your personal world or whatever. And so thanks to all the people who support me and love me, even if I'm a weirdo. And thank you for loving the weirdos in your lives, because they may not be able to say it and they may not always act like they appreciate it, but
it really makes a difference. No, that's one of those things. I'm really glad you said that, Megan. It's one of those lessons that you can be taught over and over and over again because we forget it over and over and over again. I am a consummate problem solver when somebody comes to me with a problem. I'm one of those guys, you know.
Sure.
Somebody brings me a problem and I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Yeah. Whereas the lesson that bears reminding is just listen. You know, there will be time for solving problems, and oftentimes that time is later. Right now, just listen and be there. I love that.
Yeah.
All right.
I've learned to think about what you're talking about as this problem solver, is listening as one of the ways I solve problems.
Ooh, nice.
So reframing it so that problem solver part of me is like, okay, I'm solving the problem by just listening.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I definitely second Megan's point of listening, even if you can't relate, has been had a big effect on my life, you know, of people that are willing to just listen, and, you know, even if they, and recognizing, they straight up say, like, they don't try, or they just say, like, this is a situation I don't understand, but I'm here, I'm listening, and they listen, and it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. So the problem matters to you, so it matters to me.
Yep. And usually even just explaining it out is all you need. So
any final thoughts from you, Codingfoo, on the book?
Are
you going to give this to your daughter, who I've met and is amazing?
She has already read it, and that's actually why we watched the movie. So yes, I recommend it to everyone to read. The two sequels I read as a child, they are companion books. From what I remember, they are very different. And so you worried about them kind of ruining the previous books. And I'm really tempted to myself, now that I've finished reading this one, to go back and kind of read them and see if that's the case. From what
you're probably a better person than I am, so you're better able to separate the one from the other and not let the one ruin the other. And so you go ahead.
Yeah, I just remember them being a very different type of story, and like, so it might be a little different. Then might not ruin them just because they're so different. So
it's kind of like I'm thinking, like, it's a different vibe, kind of like the movie version of The Wizard of Oz versus Return to Oz.
Okay.
Did you ever see Return to Oz? Return to Oz is terrifying. Okay, never mind.
Yep.
Not happening.
And one last option is the audiobook version I listened to. It says it's read by Madeleine L'Engle.
Really?
Wow.
Like,
jealous.
Really?
So
okay, that's it. No, I'm efforting this while we're talking. Wrinkle in Time. Read by Madeleine L'Engle. Yeah, it would appear that she did do a version. Written and read by. So there you go. You can get her version. This is not one that I had considered doing audio for, just because it is such a short book. Yeah. I don't feel like I need to use any tricks or techniques or time savers to get through it. You know, take it to the gym and knock out an hour that way. And so I didn't even think of that. And shoot, now I just may.
Yeah, so I found it very entertaining, and it added a different element to the story that I remember. So
it's when I do nonfiction audiobooks, I always want it to be narrated by the author.
Yeah.
Because with nonfiction books, they know what they were trying to say. They know what to emphasize. They know how they're trying to make their arguments or illustrate their points or whatever. With fiction books, I'm a little torn because I think that would be true for the Madeleine L'Engle version. She knows what she was trying to convey, but does she have the skill to convey it verbally? Or I should say orally, because the whole book is verbal, so to speak. But anyway, so do you want an actress of the caliber of whoever you guys were talking about? I looked her up. She's done some good stuff. Do you want an actress like that to narrate it, or do you want the author who understood the story on, obviously an individual?
I would just
level?
see it as different takes that kind
There
of
you go.
that expand or help you look at the story from a different point of view, if you will. But because like reading it, I get the way I imagine it, and then audiobook kind of imagine things a little differently or catch different things than I did when I was reading. So,
well, I hope people will pop into Discord and let us know their thoughts. I know I said more than one thing that people will be delighted to abuse me for. So please go do that. Disagree with some of my takes or whatever, that's fine. But also, I'm curious to hear if anybody has listened to the Madeleine L'Engle audiobook or, any other versions of it that people like. I want to hear about it. So pop into Discord, everybody. Go check it out. We're going to call it here for today. Megan and Codingfoo, which, by the way, I didn't even mention. That is your name on Discord. That's how people should know you. I was terrible. I was a terrible host today, but I'm glad that the two of you were here so we could talk a little bit of Wrinkle in Time together. And I will see both of you and everybody else on Discord. And I think I'll see both of you at the 10th anniversary meetup in February. So people should go check that out. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and I will see you all next time.